Oh, hello, friends. I just really wanted to talk very briefly about Severance Season 2, Episode 7. I'm not going to spoil anything, so don't worry about that. But it's basically a fever dream, seamlessly going back and forth between three different plot lines. And one of which is Mark, basically passed out because of the previous episode, just in some sort of a coma or dreamlike state that he just can't wake up. But in this state, he is having flashbacks and memories of his wife, the good, the bad, just really getting more of the backstory between Mark and Gemma, his wife. Again, just like good old-fashioned Severance form, it is very confusing, but at the same time, it rides this line of just pulling you in and wanting to know answers. But of course, you're kind of left with more questions once the episode finally ends. But it's still just so brilliantly done, especially this episode in particular. I wouldn't be surprised if Season 2, Episode 7 is the reason that it wins all the Emmys. The unique thing about this episode is that one of the cinematographers that Ben Stiller had been working with in Season 1 and also Season 2 actually directed this for the very first time. She had never directed anything before. She was strictly a cinematographer, a brilliant cinematographer at that. And Ben Stiller kind of kept poking her like, you should really direct. She kept saying no, but when this particular episode came along and just the story behind it, intercutting between these different storylines, having to go back into the past and show Gemma and Mark's life previously, it was her opportunity to bite the bullet and be like, you know what? I think this is my time. This is the perfect opportunity for me to direct and use my cinematography skills to tell a story. And again, if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It is so brilliant. It boggles my mind on how they were actually able to pull this off, even down to the editing. And there were so many shots that were practical. You would think were CGI, but they're not. So all of these things culminating into this just brilliant work of art, really. But one particular thing stood out to me more than anything else in this episode. And it was the fact that every time they went back to past memories, it was shot on film. Now, at first, just being in this digital age we live in, I thought to myself, well, maybe they just put some really good filters on it, layers and layers of plugins or something to make digital footage look more like film. But the more I was watching it, I'm like, no, man, this has to be film. Just the color saturation, the skin tones, the slight grain to the picture quality, the little imperfections and the tiny little light pops that you see appearing on the screen. I was like, this has to be film. This has to be film. So once I finished the episode, I hopped online and then found an article, luckily, already, that had broken down and interviewed the cinematographer about how she did it and what all the various things she did in filming this particular episode. And sure enough, she said she shot all the past memories on film. That was one of her motivations in wanting to direct this episode in particular. Just being a cinematographer and having a love of the film medium, this was another opportunity for her to explore that. She even said to give it that nostalgic feel, because it was a very nostalgic time in Mark's life, looking back on his past memories and the joy that they had. But it had a profound impact on me because, it really does have a nostalgic factor that hit me deep down to my core. Because, being in my early 40s, I grew up going to the movie theater when they actually still had film reels, and movies just had that particular look to them, and they were imperfect, and they did have scratches, and they did have little light pops, and it did have a layer of grain. I'm old enough to have gone to some dollar theaters when I was growing up. Are you familiar with the concept of dollar theaters? So because back in the day in the movie theaters, everything was presented on a film reel, doing several screenings per day for weeks on end, that film would start to degrade. So just to get just that much more money from these film reels that were eventually going to be useless. Once they finished their main run in all the big theaters, they would then be sent to dollar theaters. So at that point, then the audio is probably going to be not so great, probably a little bit muffled. Your high frequencies are going to be non-existent, or perhaps just the grain and the scratches and the pops are even more apparent and just all over the place. So yeah, that's why they only charged $1 instead of $7 or $10 or whatever it was back in the day, because it probably wasn't going to be the greatest presentation in the end. But despite having digital presentations nowadays looking just absolutely gorgeous, shot in 8K or 12K and then reduced down to 4K or whatever, and the level of detail in their skin, and you could see every individual hair and stuff. And while I do appreciate that, there was just something so cinematic about film. And for whatever reason, whatever kind of attachment to nostalgia it had, seeing that episode of Severance made me miss the cinema, made me miss the look, made me miss the cultural event that a blockbuster weekend would actually have, when everyone was lining up and so excited to be able to experience a movie together in a public space, clap together, cheer together. I don't know, man. I know I'm just another 40-something dude who's talking about nostalgia and back in the day, it was so much better and blah, blah, blah. So I get it. But at the same time, I hope Kodak just makes a resurgence. I hope the demand of shooting on film starts to become more commonplace, to where shooting on film isn't as expensive as it is right now. Because since everything is shot on digital now, yeah, it is really expensive to shoot on film. That's why it's usually limited to very well-known, popular shows like Severance, who have good budgets, or Christopher Nolan shooting on IMAX film. But I hope me talking about it, and I hope others talking about it, allows it to kind of have a resurgence. Because, to be honest, I don't need that brilliant aesthetic and so sharp, so crisp. I can see every single detail with such perfection. I don't need that. I like the little pops. I like the grain. I like the color saturation. Because that was the other thing that clued me into the fact that that Severance episode was shot on film, or at least the scenes focusing on the past memories. There's just a color science and a saturation and just the way that the lighting is captured on film that you cannot replicate with a digital camera. And it's the same even with still photography, where there's landscapes and portraits done so well with digital photography. There's just something about the science and the chemical process behind shooting on film that has a look that I just prefer. I mean, Ansel Adams. Who would be the equivalent to Ansel Adams today with digital photography? I mean, let me know in the comments. I would love to be able to see some photos that are Ansel Adams level from some modern digital photographer. I'd love to see that, so please let me know in the comments. Anywho, I just really wanted to get this off my chest after seeing that episode because, yeah, it just struck a chord with me. And I want shooting on film to be normalized once again. I want Kodak to be back in business because more and more independent filmmakers might have access to it. Maybe the price of admission to shoot on film becomes less because it becomes more in demand, I hope. Whatever the case, I just want it. I really do. Digital flawlessness is just not something I need. There is something more artistic about the flaws that are inherent with shooting on film. So yeah, there you have it. That's all I want to say. Bring back film. It just looks great. So what are your thoughts? Do you even care? Am I just in this tiny little minority of those just pining for the good old days of cinema and film? I don't know. Just let me know your thoughts. I'd love to read them. Let's get this conversation going, right? And with that, as always, Please be kind to each other out there. You literally never know what's going on in anybody's life, so it just makes sense to be kind to anyone who you come in contact with. Don't just watch TV and movies, experience them, especially shot on film. And of course, appreciate sound design.